gracious introduction. Rachel is the Vice President for NMC Services, and what she's going to be doing while I talk, I think, is going to make this a much more interesting talk. And so we'll see how it goes. I like to think in metaphors, and so one of the key metaphors that we have to work with this morning is the notion of sunrise. And so I brought a number of sunrises with me. The thing that I love about them, and I don't get to see very many, I have to be honest, it's not my time of the day. I travel a lot, and so I'm often jet-lagged and other stuff. But we rarely get moments when we really can have that sense of renewal, of refreshment. And I chose sunrises this morning because it really resonates with one of the key themes of the conference, which is the inside out, outside in. The idea of being able to remix the day ahead is what a sunrise embodies for me. And I've had the opportunity to be up for some pretty spectacular ones, and so I wanted to show some of those. Now, there's another couple of themes for the conference that I want to mention as well right at the outset. One is the notion of radical transparency, and that is something that definitely the NMC is a very open, transparent kind of organization in a different way than museums or other sorts of collections organizations might be. I'm not so sure what I'm able to bring to that topic. And then the third topic is the idea of virtuous circle. And I've thought a lot about all of those. And, you know, in the context of rebooting and renewal and that sort of thing. And what could be the right frame for thinking about these topics? Just let me be honest, I'm not from your world. I'm not a museum professional. That's not where my expertise comes from. What I am is a person that thinks an awfully lot about society and technology and the implications of each for the other. We all live in that society. Those societies actually would be a better way to describe it, because it's a very heterogeneous, diverse, wonderful world that we live in. And so today what I want to do is to maybe give you a frame to think about outside in, inside out, to think about radical transparency, and to think about the virtuous circle ideas that you're going to be talking about in your other sessions, coming through a different frame. And the frame that I want to pick, I'm calling generations, and you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. And one last little sunrise. This one was a couple of weeks ago. I was up in Jackson Hole. I thought it might be the perfect one to kind of have the notion of it just felt like it needed a lion. So it does. So Nancy kind of laid out, you know, what we're going to be doing differently. One of the main things that we're doing differently is Rachel is working to record the conversation as it goes. And that's the first spin of the dial, is, you know, let's have it be not just me talking, but let's have it be kind of really visual. So I'm going to use a lot of photographs in this, as you've kind of already noticed. Most of them are mine. I'm a photographer, so it's actually my strategy for getting around copyrighted. I give myself permission to use them, and it's just so much simpler. But we're also going to have another perspective, another visual perspective that's going to be added to it. And then the second way we wanted to spin the dial was to include the notion of conversation. And this is not a conversational format. Let's be honest about that. We're going to have Q&A at the end, but even with Q&A, that's not conversation. That's Q&A, and you know, it's just not conversation. So we thought, how can we actually get the conversation? And we thought, well, let's take it out of this setting and put it somewhere else. And so that's what Nancy was talking about. We're literally going to take this outside, we're going to put it out in the foyer, and it'll be out there all the time. There'll be pins. You can add to it yourself if you're wanting to, you know, just to add to the record of it. But we're also going to be continuing conversation in a very different, one-on-one, very informal way. during the breaks a couple of times. And hopefully that will keep kind of some of the things going. Now, a little sugar break. The first notion that I want to do is the idea of perspectives. Sometimes changing your perspective is as easy as turning around. And so when I took this photograph, that was looking one direction, and this was looking the other. It's simply a matter of turning around to get a completely different perspective. There's other ways to get perspectives, different perspectives. This is a perspective on London from the top of the eye, which is not the typical way that you look at it, or another one from Singapore, the top of the sands. I like to be on top of things. Makes me feel like I'm being efficient. Sometimes changing your perspective is just noticing something really unexpected and maybe a little bit beautiful. You know, so you're like flying along a typical slog. You look out the window and there's that. You just go, wow. Your perspective just changed, you know, just because of that. Or maybe you're in a beautiful place, you know, and you've gone somewhere to reboot your perspective. And sometimes you just find yourself in the wrong place, you know, and you're going like, I'm not really sure this is where I should park my helicopter. Yeah. I actually flew on that helicopter there. When I looked back on it, I said, I sure hope it's going to be there when we come back. We're going to use the metaphor of flight to kind of frame the ideas. I'm going to be sharing 4 ideas this morning. And so I wanted to use the idea of flight. So you're all being upgraded. Okay? We're going to put you in the elite access line. And whenever you see something like this, that means we're moving off in another direction. We're just about to take off. And I want to talk a little bit about generations at this point. I chose this picture. This is my mom and my granddaughter. And it's kind of a special moment. And as I look at it, I have a lot of reactions to the photograph. But what I want to share with you today is how different those 2 lives are going to be. They're sharing some of those lives together. There's an overlap in them, so they have some shared experience. But most of their experience is not shared. Most of their experience is defined by when they were born. And so the life my mother led was really defined by being a child in the Depression and a young adult in World War II. And those 2 events really defined her life. My granddaughter, Ava, is in the world that we live in today. And it's a world where there are lots of exciting things happening in and around the network. We're seeing big shifts in entertainment and music and publishing and all sorts of things. We don't know what her life is going to be. This is my grandparents. Now, my grandparents' lives basically parallel the 20th century. So they were born, one in 1900, one in 1902. Sadly, they're both gone now. But as I think about their lives and the notion of change, just think about the big technologies that happened in that time period. And let's just start at the beginning, all right? How about radio? First time actually hearing in real time communication from Paris in New York. That was change. That was a big deal. A really, really big deal. The notion of automobiles. The notion of airplanes and air travel. Space travel was in their lifetime. Telephones, the original network, were in their lifetime. The invention of the internet was in their lifetime. The invention of the computer was in their lifetime. But if I would have asked my grandmother what were the most significant technologies that happened in her life, well, I think the car would have been at the top of the list, but I think she would have also put the washing machine. And we chuckle, you know, because you never really had to wash clothes like that. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So this is my dad when he was a young man. heading off to be a soldier. And his life really was very, very different. Most of those things had been invented by the time that he was born. So he grew up in a world that always had cars, that always had airplanes. It didn't always have space travel, but it always had telephones. Television had already been invented, even though it wasn't really widespread, but radio was certainly pervasive in his lifetime. Yet he had more in common with this guy in Tokyo than he had with his parents, or for that matter with me, because this man was also a World War II veteran. His life was also defined by the Second World War in a different kind of way, but in a way that actually parallels my own father's experience much closer than my father's experience with me. And when I think about my son, who's now 26, a teacher in Korea, and the way that he thinks about technology, and the way he thinks about the world, he really comes from a different place than I do. We have shared experience. We overlap some. But that's the frame that I want to use today, is that notion of the fact of what the world looks like to us is really largely dependent on when we're born, in a great, great sense. So we'll leave you with this last little image, and you think about, all right, the next generation, the littlest ones, where are they going to go? This is really the future for us, for those people. Those little fingers are about 4 minutes old. Okay, off we go into the first of the big points. Which is this one. Technology has no meaning. Now, when I thought about putting that up there, I'm not really talking about this in a philosophical way. This is not like Nietzsche or something like that. What I'm talking about is the word itself really doesn't convey a meaning. Of course, technology has meaning. Anthropologists define it very, very carefully. It's all about tools. It's things that humans make to help them to do things. That's what technology is. It's things that can be shared across the human experience, those sorts of things. But when we typically talk about it, it doesn't have any meaning. So I want to tell you 2 stories that kind of illustrate that. So the first one is at the smallest museum that I've ever been to in my life. And it's in Palo Alto. And it's actually not this building. If you look kind of around the back, there's a little tiny garage. That's the museum. That's where Silicon Valley was born. That's the birthplace of technology as we think of it today in many ways. And there's a plaque in front of the house, just right in front of the porch there, identifies it as that. And this is where Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett lived when they graduated from Stanford, and it's where they founded Hewlett Packard. And so it's this little garage, and there's 3 exhibits there. So this is one. This is an exhibit. These are the actual plans that Dave drew up for their first oscillator, which was their big product. There's their workbench, which as I looked at it, reminded me a whole lot of the workbench that my dad had. It had the same sorts of tools. And there's Bill and Dave in that photograph there. And everything I see on that workbench, those are things that were part of my life and part of my dad's life. But the exhibit that really caught me was this one. Does anybody know what this is? If you were at WebWise, you do, but because I showed this same picture and told the same story. It's a radio. It's not just any radio, though. It's a special radio. It's an AM/FM radio. Now, how do I know that? Because my dad loved radios. He just adored them. Radios for him were the coolest thing of his generation. They allowed him to connect all over the world. They became the focus of his work. He loved to build them. We built radios just like that all the time. That little book there, the antenna book, we subscribed to that. So I'm standing in front of this object. I'm having actually a very, very palpable, a visceral experience here, which kind of points to the work that all of you do. The power of it sometimes really remarkable, because it's really just a dusty little old table in one way. But to me, it really evoked powerful associations with my dad, who went on to work in radar, and just the whole notion of radio waves permeated his whole life. To him, that was technology, and it was something that he really thought would change the world, and it did change the world. So of course he wanted me to be excited about radios too, because they were so cool. And so we would build them, and I learned how to wrap the coils, and I learned how to tune, and I learned all about the tubes and the crystals, and and I could probably still build a radio today. They're actually not that difficult to build, certainly not an AM radio. Not difficult to build. But to me, they weren't exciting in really any of the ways they were exciting to him. Radio to me wasn't a device that looked like this. It was a transistor radio. It was made of plastic and it fit in your pocket. It was clunky, but it still fit in your pocket. And you listened to the Beatles and the Dave Clark 5 on it. It dates me, but that's what we did. And WLS, and it connected me to the world and the music of my generation. That's what radios were to me. Now my own son, came along out of the clock forward. Came along, and I was into computers. And like my dad, I really was into computers. I could build them, I could take them apart, I knew all the parts, I could build different kinds of computers, and I probably still can. And if you go to my house, there's still computer parts just everywhere. I'm just kind of gaga over the whole notion of it. To me, it's a way of connecting to my world. It's a way to communicate with people in real time across the planet. It's everything radios were to my dad. Computers aren't me. But how about my son? There's always been computers in my son's life. They're not remarkable to him. A computer is just a way to connect to the music of his generation. It's how he listens to 9 Inch Nails and the bands that he listens to. And he gets his music a different way than I do. But the point is that there's 2 generations in my family with a lot of interest in technology and a complete disconnect on everything but the passion. The passion kind of persisted, but the notion of technology kept going. And that was because technology is really something very different for everybody. Now, I'm going to tell you another story. And this museum I'm not going to name, but this is what it looked like before they moved the stuff in. So some of you already know what museum it is just from that. But I was invited, along with Rachel and Alan Levine, my colleague from NMC, to go to a meeting there to talk about technology. They're planning a move, and they wanted to really think through technology and really get it right. And so we went to a meeting, and it looked a lot like this. This is not that meeting, but how many of you have been to a meeting that looks like this? Everybody, right? Everybody here. Okay. So we're sitting there and we're talking about the Horizon Report and our research and the things we do, and I swear I'm looking across the table and it looks like this. And these folks are on alert, that there's something not right about this. It's kind of, I'm not sure if it's scary, it's certainly not, it's just not, it's not okay, something's very wrong. Is the notion I got sitting around that table. So, and if you look, they don't have ears, but the looks on their faces are just like that. Now, I compare that to a meeting that we have in our organization. So here's a meeting we have, and we're talking about technology. Notice the dynamic is totally different. Everybody's tuned in. Everybody's focused on, everybody's looking at something. There's a sharing. Look at Matt over here. He's going, oh my God, who's eating this cookie, And everybody's kind of leaning in. And I'm going, okay, what's the difference in these 2 meetings? And then I had the insight. One meeting was about technology, and the other meeting was about a particular technology. One that we identified. It actually was about a new tool for editing video that was just like amazingly simple and just like, wow, you can do that? Really, really cool. So in the meeting at the unnamed institution, at the break we had the insight, let's change the topic. Let's talk about GIS. Let's don't talk about technology anymore. Let's talk about something that has a name. And all of a sudden, everybody in the meeting, it's like they changed T-shirts. It's like GIS, I love GIS. And all of a sudden the ideas started coming out. There's this project in Florida, and it's so cool. We could have all of these layers. We could build this, we could build that. And then this woman says, and we even can do it right here. There's a project right here that we can do it. Look, it works on its phone. And all of a sudden, it was just a creative font. And what happened differently? We quit talking about technology and we started talking about GIS. So that's my point about that word, is be careful with it because it doesn't really convey any meaning. And I tended to decide that technology is a word that we use for things that we really don't understand and are kind of a little bit afraid of. And so just when you go to your meetings, just think about, look around the room. When people are talking about generic technology, you're going just like those antelope. Try and get them to look like the other group. Try and have it to be GIS. Okay, so off to point 2. This, by the way, is the Aleutian Islands underneath the plane there. For those of you who have flown over the top of the world. All right, number 2. I know what you're thinking. But bear with me, okay? I'm going to dial the clock back again. There's a wonderful book that I recommend that's out of the UK. It's called When Old Technologies Were New. And it's all about the turn of the 20th century when electricity was being adopted everywhere in the world. And electricity was going to be the answer for everything. And in fact, it almost has been. Electricity is a pretty wonderful thing. But the conversations that people had, the concerns they had, the worries they had, the experiments they tried, you could substitute ICT for electricity in that entire book and it would still be a good book. The lessons are exactly the same. Now, in the time period that my grandparents were born, the future looked like this. And people really were trying to build it. It was the Art Deco age. And so this was a sketch that an engineer named Lowry designed. He actually built the train. There he is with the actual train there. Not exact, but pretty darn close. It was an era, though, that for all the promise that it had, it also, there was a lot of misery. So this is Dorothea Lange, one of my favorite photographers of all time, with her iconic photograph of a young mother, illustrating really, for me in a very, very powerful way, just the worry and the challenge of that time, the uncertainty of it. I'm going to play a little bit light with it, but we mentioned washing machines before. There didn't used to be a machine to do washing. This is how you did washing, and you had to heat up the water and you had the scrub board. And the reality is that for people that did the laundry, mostly women, predominantly, like 99.999% of the people that did wash were women, it meant that 4 days a week were devoted to just this activity, 4 days a week. And it was a very, very difficult activity. Then they began to, invent things, and so they invented the wringer. She still doesn't look like she's having a very good time. I mean, the wringer's a big advance, but she's not thinking about wash in that picture, near as I can tell. And you roll it forward, and all of a sudden, GE comes up, look at this. And this woman's like, wow, life is so wonderful. I still don't believe the photograph. But the only thing that's changed is that they put the agitator in the tub so that you don't have to do this action. But a lot of the technologies that came out in that time period were very much about that, about labor saving and freeing people up to do other things. And once they began to do that, and we returned from World War II, then new technologies started to emerge that were very, very different. This is one of my favorite ones because I'm a guitar player. This is the log. This is the one that, the Les Paul guitar. Les Paul is the guy that built this. The original Boogie Woogie log, 1942. Now, when we think about guitars today, they've changed a little bit, and they've become now a computer interface. And we're going to talk about that for a little bit. The notion that keyboards are for old people. This kid is actually controlling a computer that's roughly 1,000 times more powerful than one that took us to the moon, using a completely non-standard interface. And then, of course, we've got these classes of devices that have come out that are entirely touchscreen based. We'll come back to that in a little bit. And even in retail, we're starting to see things out of Minority Report. You know, and this is a store in New York where you literally are shopping for you know, things with a swipe on the screen. And this is a technology that actually is pioneered in museums. It's not really that advanced. It's a couple of laser beams and you're breaking a circuit, and it's fairly straightforward. But I keep coming back to mobile. So you folks had a mobile summit, and the very notion of what is a mobile is changing. There's all sorts of varieties of it. This is my particular favorite one, the unphone. This is a phone that's part of a system called 6 Sense. Have you heard of that? It's something that's come out of the MIT lab that's entirely gesture-based computing. Very, very interesting sort of notion. But the reality is that the devices that we use are converging to a very small footprint. The very notion of what a computer is under a fundamental transformation right now. And most of us are kind of still stuck in the view of a computer with a big TV-looking like monitor and a big, usually beige box and a keyboard. And in fact, there's not one company in the world working on the next generation keyboard. It's not anybody working on the next generation keyboard, because that's not how we're going to be doing it. You know, we're looking at reading books this way. We're photographs. The whole notion of what a computer is undergoing a profound shift, and nobody's really putting keyboards at the center of it. We need to be thinking about devices in a completely new way. Devices that connect us all the time, that are always on, that are always in our pocket, is pretty much getting to be the reality of the case. And so that's going to take us to the third point. This is flying into the base camp at Mount McKinley in Alaska, and that was a fun trip. Okay, the network is us. Now, the network has always been us. If you go back to McLuhan, I mean, the network has always been us. And I want to start back kind of then. So when we would watch, and I am of this generation, so I did that, every Wednesday night the Beverly Hillbillies came on at 7 o'clock, and I was there. And I know the whole song. You know? Well, again, folks said, all of that, yeah. And the thing is that notion of everybody together around the TV, that was real. And it wasn't just our family that gathered around the TV to watch Ed Sullivan and the first show of the Beatles, or, you know, Sid Caesar, or whatever the show was. We all in the family had our favorite ones. It also was a way that we came together as a nation. This is Walter Cronkite reading the news of the JFK assassination in real time. And that triggered 3 days of the entire nation sitting around the television, waiting for news. It was the dawn of the 24 news era in many sorts of ways. And the way that we think about news it gives us a really good insight into the way the network works. And you still see this. You know, I was at an event that David Cameron was at, and just before he got there, these guys show up, and you know somebody important is about to be there. You know, because it's just, they follow around a little gaggle and they just kind of appear. But when you think about how real news happens, I mean news of import, not political news or the kind of news that you have news agencies for, it happens like this. This is what shows up. And this is the kind of images that come from those cell phones. This is a photograph of what was happening in Tehran after the elections a year and a half ago. And it staggered the world that these images were coming out of there. And videos that I've debated showing this morning, but I thought, no, they're really too raw and too disturbing in many ways. We've probably all seen them, but I didn't want to divert the point. Or when the earthquakes came to Haiti, again, you know, this is not a journalist photograph. This is a random person carrying around a cell phone and then uploading that picture to the internet. When you think about how many cell phones there are in the world, we just passed 5 billion active cell phone accounts in the world. 5 billion in July. 6.7-ish billion people in the world, so we're getting pretty close to about 80% of the population is carrying cell phones. And in some countries like Singapore, what do you think the penetration rate is? 2 years ago, the latest data, 137%. They got more than one. Well, the thing is with everybody carrying a cell phone, our whole notion of the world has changed. We've all become walking multimedia capture devices in a way that has profound implications. I don't even begin to know where they are, but they're all tied up into this notion of freedom of expression, of freedom of ideas, which is a dangerous thing in a lot of ways, but I kind of like it. And so I view this as a good thing, but there are plenty of people for whom that's not a good thing. But there's another dimension to this too, and if you think about, you're the person that captured one of these images. You have become somebody kind of important. You have contributed to the collective memory of all of us. And for people that are at the margins of society, this is almost like immortality in a way. I mean, we all contribute to the network all the time. It's not a big deal. We write articles and books, and so we've left our mark on the collective knowledge. But imagine day laborers in Los Angeles, many of whom illegally in the country. They don't have that same experience in any way. And so I was very interested in a research project out of the University of Southern California called Voces Moviles. And any kind of research actually that shows me more insight into the haves and have-nots when it comes to mobiles. And it's very interesting. Voces Moviles was a program that first off they went in and surveyed these day laborers, and 80% of them had a cell phone. They don't have anything else, but they have a cell phone. Now it's a pay-as-you-go cell phone. It's a pretty basic cell phone, but it has multimedia, it captures video, it captures pictures, it of course does phone calls, it sends text, and so they built an entire blog site around that community in Los Angeles called Voz Mob. And the people that contribute to it, if you go and listen to the videos, it's changed their life, it's changed their self-perception, because they're able to be part of that network. And the reason why they're able to be part of it is because it's in their hand, like this. Very, very powerful stuff. So where's it all going to go? Well, television is already changing. Google TV was announced on Sunday at Adobe Max, and they gave away Google TV boxes to everybody there. I wasn't there, but I had a ticket, so I got one too, which is kind of cool. And I began thinking about how has television changed since Ed Sullivan, so I picked my favorite show. Just a little aside, I've been on The Daily Show, just the back of my head, but it's very recognizable, and I was there. And if you don't believe me, I'll show you the episode. It's inclined on my laptop. So this is now my favorite show of all time. Last night, The President was on, and I missed it, but because of the web, it doesn't matter. I get to watch it today. And I not only get to watch it today, but I get to watch it with everybody else that watches it, and I get to comment on it. And the community around television has changed. Okay? That community about Ed Sullivan, the community of Walter Cronkite, we still gather around these shows, but we don't do it the same way. Now we're doing it on Facebook. And there's 1.6 million followers of Jon Stewart on Facebook, and they're just always interacting and talking, and it's just a new expression of how that goes. We're seeing that in every industry, so I'll pick one, music, which is one that I really like, and a couple of gratuitous music pictures here. And the whole notion of becoming a fan of a musical group was one of the first things that Facebook came up with. And it grew into the notion of like and how that worked. And I could give a whole talk just on Facebook because it's a pretty remarkable space. But what's even more remarkable is what's happening as a result of Facebook. And so now iTunes has social networking. And you have pinging now as part of iTunes. And so you can not only leave your money with Apple, but you can talk about how happy you are that you've done so. As you're there. You know, but the whole notion of the network being us is something that we've only begun to tap. And this is a picture of a tool. These are my Facebook friends, some of them. Because I do research in Facebook, I have a lot of actually Facebook friends. And I would love to have more, so if you would like to be my friend, I would love to be yours. This sort of shows you everybody that's in your Facebook, and these are actually little spheres. I wish I could show it to you live because you can fly around in it. But the notion of being connected in those ways has given rise to whole new sciences and a whole new book, Nicholas Christakis and the notion of connected, something I recommend. Okay, let's keep going. We're over the top of the world now, and to the last point. And the network is us, and just like us, it's really everywhere. We keep coming back to this notion of mobiles, and here's a very, very interesting little notion. This just came out from Ericsson, the world's largest cell phone manufacturer, that by 2015, in a little over 4 years, 80% of the people that go online anywhere in the world will be doing it through a mobile device. 80%. Now today, in Japan, that's already true. 5 years ago, they passed 50%. And they're at 80% now. Now part of that is the internet speed in Japan is 61 megabits a second, which is 30 times faster than what we call broadband. Or, if you like, 120 times faster than what the hotel calls. So much so that a lot of people, including my staff, have just started carrying the internet around with them in their pocket, little devices, little hotspots that use the cell networks rather than buying network by the bit, you know, from providers like the ones here. And it's changing the way that we're thinking about it. The reason why people would carry something like this around is because the expectation is that the internet is everywhere. And if it's not, we're not happy campers. You know, I was in a meeting with Rob today. Rachel noticed he was smiling. Sure enough, he had a big old smile. You know, why is Rob so happy? He said, got on the internet. It's connected, you know, and there is a joy to that, you know. Well, let's think about the internet, you know, because we used to think about it like this, and I call this the cauliflower map of the internet because there's something in the bottom drawer of my fridge that looks a lot like this. But we can't think of the internet that way anymore because it is so pervasive, it's so big, it's really impossible to think of it as trees and branches and the kinds of things that it started off in the ARPANET. And so when I begin to think about the internet, I tend to go out into space to look at the Earth as a whole. And of course, this is a composite picture of the Earth at night. What I love about it is it shows where the electricity is. This is a map, if you will, of the electric grid. And I make this point over and over, so if you were web watching, saw this one as well. But it's deserving of being made again. Let me overlay another map that looks a lot like it. There it is. That's the GSM map. That's the mobile networks. Okay, so just pick any place you like. Take Central Africa, Brazil, Argentina, or my favorite, anywhere in Australia. Let's go back to the world at night. Okay? Look at Australia. You see all the big cities, all 5 of them in Australia there. Nice and easy. The mobile networks are just far more pervasive than what we typically think of as the electric grid. Now, to be fair, the Earth at night doesn't show every electric bulb, and doesn't show where every electric wire goes, but it's a pretty dramatic notion that the way that the cellular networks is expanding is different fundamentally than the way that you expand a network with wires, and that's because you can do it like this. This is a cell tower in Qatar, and it is on a trailer. It has solar cells on the top, a generator for a cloudy day, which in Qatar they don't have any of those, by the way, so it's really got a lot of redundancy. You drag this out into the boonies with your truck, and you drop it off, and you raise the tower, and you just expanded the cell network 30 miles in every direction. That's how hard it is to do. You know, it's just not that hard. And so the cell networks are expanding at a rate that's even difficult to map. The map that I just showed you, this one is from 2009. The 2010 map will be out in about 8 months, and if it parallels what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years, Australia is going to be pretty much all gold. We're going to see the whole southern half of Africa filled in, likewise with South America. India is going to be completely filled in, and already I know that the southeast is pretty much all 3G already today. They sell every year 1.2 billion brand new phones. One phone for every 6 people on the planet, every year. So in 6 years, everybody on the planet, theoretically, could have a new phone. That's a lot of phones and a lot of innovation in the marketplace. So I was really interested in, where are these going? Because are we really contributing to a situation where we're making the digital divide worse? That's a worry that I want to monitor. And the fact is that no, it actually appears that that's not at all the case, because these devices are far cheaper than computers, and you don't have to have all of the infrastructure to connect to the internet on a cell phone that you do to connect on a laptop or a regular computer. And so what we're seeing is as countries come into the digital era later, they're just skipping all of that, going right to the mobile solutions. And those are growing considerably faster. And so, you look at some countries in South Africa, of course, is a pretty anomalous part of Africa, but their cell phone penetration rate is 1.2 cell phones per person. And, that's kind of remarkable. A third of the population of all of Africa have mobiles, which is surprising, actually. And so, we're going to take it on in now. Our helicopter, and we're going to land on that little atoll over there. And back to the notion that we started with generations. Another picture of my mom. And just thinking about how different her notions of the things I just talked about are. How different her notions of technology are. How different her notions of the network, of devices, of the way that we connect with people. Actually, she's pretty technological. She loves email because she's able to keep up with all of her great-grandkids and her grandkids and stuff in ways that she never could. So the communication parts of it feel pretty normal. She implements letter writing and all the things that grandmothers talk about. But, she's pretty connected. But, as we think about the future connections between generations, so this mother and this daughter in Korea, or this moment here where my little granddaughter met her brother for the first time about 5 minutes after he was born. And I think about them as the future. And so I'm going to leave you with this quote from the Harry Potter series. Albus Dumbledore, very, very wise wizard. It's our choices, Harry, that show us what we truly are, far more than our abilities. And that's the last thing I want to leave you with, is the notion of choices, because this is your audience, this guy. He actually loves museums. This is an authentic Austinite person. But this is also your audience. This guy on the fringes is actually desperate to understand his place in the world. And culture has a big part of that. A big, big part of that. And this kid who's just wondering what you got. Or this girl. Or this young kid. Are we building radios for them? Is that what our solution is going to be? How are we going to be thinking about technology? What we want to keep in these kids is this. This is the magic that museums bring. That moment, that jaw-dropping, oh my gosh, that's so cool. That's what you guys do so well. That's the notion I want to leave you with as you go to your conference. Make that happen. Turn things inside out to make that happen. Be transparent in ways that make people do that. And you'll get your virtuous circle. And so with that, we're going to land this creaky little airplane.